Well, people, this is it. We've made it. The big finale, the grand show, the fight for the throne is over. Winter is come and gone. Apparently, it is here. The Talkin' Thrones finale for the Game of Thrones finale, season 8, episode 6, the long-awaited The Iron Throne. Pat, what do you have to say before we wrap this series up for good?
Hey, Dom, I think you and the Talking TV family that's Talking Thrones with us here tonight can agree. Like, that visual of the Iron Throne melting is like ice cream melting on the cone as a kid, and you just, lose your dessert and you want to scream and cry over it. And that's what happens here in Westeros.
Not exactly the metaphor that I would have thought of. A dragon burning down a throne made of metal swords compared to a kid losing his ice cream. But hey, all of that and more on the final episode of Talking Thrones. Well, Pat, this is it. We've reached it. Like I said, we've obviously been building towards this since we started this show back in April of last year. Hard to believe that we are here recording the final episode of the show, and that it's strange because, when we first said goodbye to the show back in, I want to say it was May of 2019, there was just something that felt so uncathartic about it. So, what's the word I'm looking for? It just felt so unfulfilling. You felt like you just finished this and you're like, it was one of those, well, that was it. I kind of want more, But it's really strange what the benefit of hindsight brings, living through a pandemic, taking into consideration the things that you have. I feel like we had a lot of thoughts going into the show as far as what we thought we were going to talk about versus what we ended up talking about. Certain things that we thought we liked that we didn't end up liking, certain things that we thought we were going to hate that we ended up finding a little bit more out of. Like I said, I feel like I got a lot more out of these last couple seasons that I feel like I did the first time around, learned some things, got some new perspective, started to figure out kind of where it truly rests with the show. But first things first, before we get started, we do this at the beginning of every episode. Pat, walk me through your thoughts. The final episode airs, like I said, it's 1 week after the bells, that hugely traumatizing event of an episode. As I've said, for me, we broke down all the faults and flaws with it, but also maybe some of the good things that happened with it last week. And it was all leading to this. Like I said, Daenerys has gone full heel turn at this point. The city of King's Landing is in absolute ruins, even worse off than when the Lannisters sacked it way back in Robert's Rebellion. The characters are picking up the pieces. We weren't sure what was going to happen. And then obviously, like I said, this episode airs, and the rest is history. The memes came out, and it felt like this. I feel like the strangest thing about this is that it all felt like it came and gone, and then a month later, it was forgotten about. Like, this didn't have that. Like, that's, I feel like, the biggest source of confusion for this finale is that it didn't have like kind of the long-lasting kind of strife and ire, like when the Sopranos finale aired or when the Lost finale aired. This was the biggest show on the air, arguably for a decade. And the finale airs, and it feels like it's forgotten about in a week. So, walk me through your thought process just on that and on the episode itself.
So, it's kind of a weird thing because my experience the first time going through this was season 8 was not the ending I was desiring, right? They took care of the Night King first 3 episodes. I thought that was sort of really the climax of the show completely. And then they kind of, deal with the whole Daenerys Cersei arc with the next 3 episodes. So, like, I sort of disagreed with that decision the first time I watched through the show, and I felt like the momentum wasn't really carrying me through that second half of season 8. And, I was just, my mood was down because they kind of, in my mind, botched the Night King a little bit. And then the second time I watched through the series, I kind of just like stopped after the Night King was gone. And then here it is the third time here Talking Thrones, just to basically break down and analyze each episode with you, Dom. And I'm forcing myself to watch these 3 episodes that I didn't give a chance on the second watch. And I'm actually finding that I enjoy this season now that I'm kind of disconnected from the original hype and like the dinner parties with friends and watching it and kind of doing the water cooler thing, and now that I'm sort of binge watching it, the episodes are not bad. There's a lot of flaws, and there's a lot of place where you and I have discussed there could be improvement, or just better written storylines, more setup. I think what we got in the beginning of the series versus what we get towards the end, it's just not the well written series that we wanted. Or I guess it is still well written because they're
Right.
cool action sequences, they're cool episodes. They're just not as character driven, and well plotted as before. I feel like they just sort of, we just got to hit these beats in this episode, and we don't care if we set it up or not. The jump cut to the dragon being shot in the one episode. It just comes out of nowhere. There's no setup. There's nothing. It's just a dragon's got to die because Daenerys got to get angry. It just doesn't feel right. And then I started watching this episode, prepping for today, and man, like just nothing. There's not even a pulse in this episode from my point of view. Like, it just kind of like wraps things up, and it's like you're just watching it,
Right.
and I get the story, I get how they wrap it up, and I guess I'm not necessarily opposed to things, but like there's just nothing there for me. It's just presented there in front of me, and as I'm sitting there and just my mind's not even focused on the episode. I'm just thinking, how could this be better? And the only thing I could really think of is they utilize Bran in his visions, because Bran should have warped to the past when King Robert and ascended the throne, when the Lannisters sort of sacked King's Landing the first time. Because in my mind, if the viewer through Bran's eyes got to see the destruction that happened in King's Landing, and the way that the Westerosi lords sort of did the same thing to the people, maybe we could sort of have a little bit of tension between like John's, sort of, mission to off Daenerys. Because we would know that, here's these Westerosi lords, they kind of destroyed the city in the past, and now they see Daenerys as the foreign conqueror that she is, and now they're trying to sort of, protect their way of life. And maybe there would be sort of a little bit of like, aren't you hypocrites? You guys sort of sacked the city when it was convenient to you, and she kind of did the same thing. I think there's could be this, and then that could have led to Bran being named king, because listen, he's the one that knows the
He's
history.
literally all seeing and all knowing. Yeah,
Yeah,
I feel like
it's just there's so much that could have happened to build up the dramatic tension. All we get is like an hour and 20 minutes of exposition dump.
yeah, pretty much. One of the recent things that I've been hearing from a couple of our YouTube compatriots that we've been, collaborating with over these last couple of years is written by algorithm. A lot of times when you see like a bad movie or like a recent bad movie, you'll be like, it feels like this movie was written by an algorithm that's trying to mimic like what it is that we like. And I definitely got that feeling this most recent time watching this episode. I want to say this is like my third or fourth time watching this episode, where I think that your point that you brought up a couple episodes ago on The Last of the Stars, which I think is kind of where we can both agree, at least for this season, that where things really started to go wrong. Like we talked about some of the problems that came with the long night, but for the most part, despite its placement in the season, the long night, I'd still say, was a pretty interesting, entertaining, and like thoroughly engaging episode. It's just placed at the wrong point. The point that you brought up a couple episodes ago, where it's like, yeah, if this had like a better edit, you're like, there's a good story in this season somewhere. It's just a matter of it is just edited poorly. And I think that's kind of where it comes down to, is the fact of, look, we talked about at the beginning of the show about kind of how our mission with this recap series was to try and figure out what went wrong. And while needless to say, it's gotten a lot more complicated since then, just as far as figuring out, oh man, there's just still so much to love about this show. Again, there's a reason why even when the show was at its worst, it is still, to me, one of the best shows ever made, just because it is doing and accomplishing storytelling on such a level that so far surpasses what we've come to expect from television, that the idea of, I think, even comparing it to feature films is unfair. Just it almost like created its own subgenre in and of itself, which I think is kind of why Benioff and Weiss developed this sense of hubris almost when it came to these final couple of seasons. Obviously, George R. R. Martin has been on the press junket for House of the Dragon. He's been talking about how he was kind of out of the loop for the last couple of seasons, and he basically had like almost no involvement in season 7 or 8. In fact, he even said the only reason why they even went with Bran as king and how they attributed it to Martin is because Martin suggested it as an idea when they were drafting season 6 while he was off, writing Elden Ring or whatever he was going on. So I think that kind of what comes down to it is, and again, this is no surprise because this is something that I feel like people have come to the conclusion of years ago, is that Benioff and Weiss simply got a little bit too big for their britches, ultimately. They kind of probably had this feeling that they were a little bit all too powerful. They were kind of playing fast and loose with not even just, the show itself, just basic storytelling rules, thinking that they could just throw in stuff whenever with little to no setup and basically expect the audience to go along with it because they'd been along for the ride so much at this point. They obviously, once they really started to depart from the novels, they really started to settle into more of it being an action-based spectacle show rather than a character-driven drama, which is what it started out as, And while that certainly provided for some really, really entertaining moments within these last couple seasons, I feel like at the end of the day, kind of what it is that made people fall in love with the show in the first place was slowly stripped away episode by episode, season by season for those last couple seasons. And that's probably also factors into why a lot of people felt cheated. I feel like it's kind of that thing you get where it's kind of almost like that delayed reaction where you understand that what you're watching is not as good as what it used to be, but because what you're getting is still so entertaining, you're like, oh, okay, they'll pick up, it'll keep going, especially like I still remember the heyday of Game of Thrones in 2016 when season 6 was on the air, which felt like such a breath of fresh air compared to season 5. Again, just the action, the spectacle, the storytelling, you were getting all these characters back. Things felt like they were finally building towards a finale and a conclusion of some sort, and I think that's kind of what this comes down to, is that the final consensus for season 8 as a singular organism is that while it is not the worst season of television I've ever seen, I've seen seasons of television that are far worse and sloppier, it's the fact that it ultimately was conceived out of hubris is what I'll say. And like I said, that's a really very choice specific word to throw around because again, like hubris is something that's always going to be associated with art and creativity. Narcissism is inherently a part of it. But I mean, you look at everything that Benioff and Weiss thought that they were shaping themselves up to. They essentially came out of the woodwork. They had like a couple of track records in Hollywood. Like I said, they'd written a couple of novels that had been adapted for screenplays. They'd had a couple of writing credits on some really, really bad movies at the beginning of the decade before they landed Thrones. And then they essentially land this show that ends up transforming into one of the two biggest pop culture phenomenons of that entire decade. They're lining up. They think they're getting all these checks. They're like, oh, we've got deals with Netflix. We've got deals with Disney. And they ultimately decide to cheapen out on the thing because they're like, okay, we've already got our next couple of gigs lined up here, And I think it sucks because I'm not going to say that it would have been that much better because, again, I feel like there was a definite dramatic shift down. We've talked a lot about kind of the difference between like Benioff and Weiss's Thrones and George R. R. Martin's Thrones. And I feel like a big part of the reason why people feel so refreshed with House of the Dragon is because this is the biggest amount of involvement that Martin has had in a property based off one of his original source materials since, I would say, season 4 of the show, which was the last season that he wrote in episode 4. It was the last season that he was really fully involved in before he started to depart. So I think that's ultimately what it comes down to is, again, George R. R. Martin's Game of Thrones versus what Benioff and Weiss's approach to the show post Martin's departure, kind of their overall hubris, and just the fact that they felt like they could take a lot of liberties that ultimately really ended up tarnishing their product ultimately, like the decision, I said, the decision to do the long night.
Dom, it's really HBO's product, and I think Benioff and Weiss were given that creative freedom. That must have been the case, right? So, they created what they felt was the best story that they could create, and it's like a lot of the audience, including myself, sort of disagree with a lot of the elements of the final season. And it's just it could have been more entertaining. That's where my disappointment comes from is like, it is entertaining, but it could have just been a lot better.
See, that's where I disagree with you on. I wouldn't use the word entertaining. I'll say that while it was definitely entertaining, I'll say it could have been more engaging and more well thought out. Like you said, there was a version of this final season that utilizes almost this exact same story structure, not entirely, but ends up having a really thoroughly engaging, like really fulfilling finale that involves the Daenerys heel turn, that involves him taking down the Night King, that involves Bran becoming king, that involves all of that. There is a version of that works, just not the one that we got.
Yeah, I just don't believe that they, plotted it. I don't think they thought out the story. Like, if you look at the first 3 episodes and probably half of the 4th episode, dealing with the North and the Night King and all that stuff, like that stuff, I think lands.
Yes.
It's really to that jump cut of the dragon when we go to King's Landing that I start having like, man, they could just have done.
By the way, I just wanted to give you a quick compliment. I'm sorry, that point where you were like, spear comes out of nowhere. It's dragon. Yeah, the show dies. It's one of the greatest, I think, like just cutaways I think we're gonna have from this show. That's gonna have me laughing for a long time.
Listen, it's to me, I just my heart. I was digging that 4th episode, and then that happened. And that's my heart instantly.
I feel like that's
sank.
the moment where it's like that's just where everyone's heart sinks. It's like, oh man, it's so great. They conquered the North. They're like, oh, what? They're like, Rhaegal's dead. What happened? And then your eye just comes out of nowhere. And you're like, what is going on?
It's just like too fast for me in that particular episode. But like moving to this half of the season, it's just I don't think they really thought everything out because just as I'm sitting here kind of thinking about it, it's what's one of my biggest problems is Jon does the whole offing of Daenerys, and then it goes into this council meeting that takes up a third of the episode, and Grey Worm is kind of like calm and collected, like, well, you killed my queen, but we are at this uneasy peace.
The first immediate fall, and here's my controversial take on this episode as well, is I do not hate the first half of this episode. The first half of this episode, from them walking into King's Landing up to Drogon carrying Daenerys' body away over the Iron Throne.
Yeah, that's all fun.
I'm fine with. I'm good with that. Works.
Well, yeah, because you have Tyrion. He finds Jaime and Cersei.
Like the story beats are there. Like Tyrion
that's a little cheesy, but it still works.
It works. Him going in, him finding the bodies, building up to Daenerys with the throne. Which I have a point where I'm going to get to. Like Benioff and Weiss. This is famously the only other episode that they've directed. The only episode that they directed together, and the first episode that they directed since Benioff directed season 3's Walk of Punishment, and Weiss directed the season 4 premiere, Two Swords. This is the first episode they've directed together, and I have a point saved for later for like most ridiculously comical, over the top, like obvious visual metaphor shots. But I'll save that for it a little bit, just the part that we're really showing off the technical. But like,
I think this is connected to the ice cream. But
going up to Daenerys making the speech in front of the Dothraki and the Unsullied, Arya talking to Jon going to visit Tyrion, and Tyrion.
That speech is awesome.
It's
like
great.
It's like she is definitely 100% is bent on finding the next war, and it kind of it comes out of nowhere. All of a sudden she's like,
but one could argue that like pretty much all of Daenerys' decisions over the last episode and a half have kind of come out of nowhere. I feel like by this point, by current Game of Thrones logic, we're already used to this.
Yeah, but she basically, like, Sauron is coming in from a different universe and
pretty much,
and like controlling her mind at this point because she's like getting all the black. You know, she might as well be creating orcs.
Pretty much,
not to jump into other intellectual properties.
Yeah,
but,
like I said, Jon, what's it called? Jon comes up. Oh man, what was I just gonna say? Tyrion obviously confronts her with the whole throwing the thing down, and Tyrion having to convince Jon that Daenerys needs to die and all that. Like, that's the only probably dialogue exchange from this first half of the episode that I'm like, little bit obvious, little bit on the nose, where Tyrion's going through this whole spiel, song and dance number. He's trying to get Jon to the fact that Jon literally just witnessed Daenerys do what she did and still has to be talked into realizing that she is a threat by Tyrion. Like, again, like, obviously us as the audience are still like getting used to this because this whole flip of a switch seemingly happened, at least for us, in the matter of like so fast that we barely have had time to process it. So like we're still obviously not on board with like killing Daenerys and like her being a villain. We're kind of still in that like what's it called? Stockholm place of it's like, no, it's okay. She'll still be a good ruler. She's not a danger to everyone. But like within
here's the thing is I just don't think as a audience member, I believe he's so deeply in love with her that he's willing
Oh
to be
no, not at
delusional.
all. Not at all.
You know, like at this point, like he's been sort of, you know, disillusioned with their relationship for at least, you know, throughout the bells and in this episode. And it kind of started, you know, in that fourth episode of the season. So,
Right.
you know, it's not like he's been making decisions where it's like this is hard to do. Like,
Right.
you know, maybe this is where like the whole idea of Cersei being pregnant was a terrible idea. Like maybe Daenerys, you know, should have been with child. You know,
Yeah,
and
that would
then
have been cool.
and then John
That
is
would have actually given him a little bit of
yeah,
an extra incentive because
he's a little more
unfortunately,
conflicted. But they
right,
kind of said that she's barren from now on because of the
right,
whole witch
because of the
doctor
whole
and
witch
Drogo,
doctor
and
thing
so
from first season. Yeah.
yeah, so it's one of those things where like, you know, I know they can't do that because they kind of wrote themselves into the, you know, the corner there, but the fact is, like, why is he conflicted over killing her?
Right.
You know, he has never backed down from doing the right thing.
Exactly. And that's the whole thing that kind of is, and this is what I feel like people talk about when they talk about like the show betraying John's character as well, amongst many, many other things that were portrayed by this final season, is the fact that at the end of the day, Jon Snow as a character, regardless of his Targaryen heritage or anything, all of that has never really been a factor when it comes to him doing the right thing. His character arc is always to the point where it doesn't matter how many people I piss off or how many people like kind of I anger, like he is always going to be on the side of good. Again, he brought the wildlings through the wall despite the Night's Watch turning on him and killing him as a result. You know, he led.
Yeah, I think it's true to his character that he, you know, went through and got, you know, put the knife into Daenerys, so to speak.
Right, but it's the fact that he
know,
has to be talked into it, like he's not already doing it.
Yeah, well, it's
on his
just
own,
the,
is where the problem comes from, and also
the
I'll
conflict,
say as well,
the internal battle that's
conflict,
going on is
also
just not believable.
And also what it is that Tyrion uses as his kind of excuse. It's almost kind of like what happened with Jaime in the Bells, and out of nowhere, Jaime's like, "Oh, I never really cared about the people of King's Landing." When it's like, what? Like, wasn't that your whole character arc and motivation as far as like kind of keeping all that buried conflict hidden? Where it's like, so Jon essentially, and this is again where Benioff and Weiss are trying to reference season 1 of the show, but I think rather poorly, is that Tyrion basically tells Jon, is like, look, you are always, you swore to protect the realms of men, you know, kind of referencing his old Night's Watch realm. She has now become a threat to the realms of men. And it's not until Tyrion realizes, again, does the Varys thing, that what Varys said to Ned Stark back in season 1, when Ned was stuck in the dungeon and vehemently not going to denounce his statements on Joffrey until Varys brought up that Sansa would be killed unless he did that in order to protect her. It's the fact that Tyrion has to do the same thing to Jon and reminds him, like, oh, you know, Sansa's the one that started this whole little rumor chain that led to this series of events. You know, what do you think Daenerys will do to her if she remains in charge? You know, and it's like the fact that he has to use Sansa as the prioritizing,
it's not even
the
that.
motivating factor.
So he uses Sansa, but it's also about him, right? Because he is the true heir to the throne, and Daenerys now knows that. And if Daenerys is, you know, consolidating her power, getting rid of, you know, Varys, getting rid of Tyrion, you know, it makes sense that she's going to get rid of Jon at some point as well. You know, it's one of those things where the premise is that she's the foreign invader that has used them to really, you know, find the weakness in Westeros, conquer it, and now all she has to do is reorganize her ranks, and she is the ruler, and basically the lords of Westeros have no claim at all anymore to the realm. And here's where the episode is kind of weird to me, is that, you know, essentially it just feels like the episode is, you know, everyone in Westeros realizes, oh man, like we're gonna lose our power. Let's just kill her. You know, like you know. So it's almost like this, like
Right.
you know,
Which is
I'm
crazy,
jumping
because,
ahead
like,
a little bit.
and this
It's
is
like
also
Sam says everybody should vote, right? And the lords are like, no, it's just our power.
Yeah,
you know what I
which
mean?
is crazy, because
that's the
what I'll say,
problem here.
what I'll say to that as well, and jumping off of that point as well, is, and this is where what also infuriates me, and this is a thing that I feel like has not been talked about enough about this episode, is this whole entire time since season 5, when Daenerys met Tyrion, what is the thing that she has been saying since minute 1 when she came to Westeros? That she wasn't going to rework the wheel or whatever, she was going to break it. The crazy thing is that if Daenerys succeeds, she does break the wheel. It's just not in the way that we all thought it was going to be. And that kind of, again, goes in line with, again, another part of the reason why I feel like people are so let down by this finale is the fact that at the end of the day, the execution was botched for sure, but it makes more and more sense when you think about it that this was always Daenerys' endgame. Daenerys was always going to be the Anakin Skywalker of the Game of Thrones story, the Song of Ice and Fire, where she starts off from a place of, a vast impoverishment coming from a royal lineage, works her way up by her bootstraps, and then ultimately has this turn, this fall from grace. And I feel like if they had handled, and I feel like this kind of idea that they're dealing with where, again, us rooting for her to destroy kind of the, what's the word I'm looking for? Not the patriarchy, but the destroy the status quo in order to make something new. And then seeing what that actually, requires, that I think was a really interesting story beat that they just dropped the ball on completely.
Well, first of all, I go back to my original point of Bran seeing the moment that Tywin took King's Landing and basically Robert ascended to the throne. There should be a callback, to that moment, and it should really parallel that, the whole fact that Tywin is the power behind the throne and that Robert is just a figurehead.
Right.
And that, Tywin basically could say to young Robert, this is the way things are run. And this is the way, what I mean?
Going also back to what Varys said to Tyrion way back in season 2, power resides where men believe it to reside,
Exactly. So I think the main thing is you could have called back to the last time that King's Landing was conquered to parallel the situation that's happening with Daenerys. And then cut to, the whole, convincing Jon to go through with the betrayal. And that happens. Now, I the dragon melting the throne is I'm fine with it, even though it is, again, another
it's a little
cheesy
obvious
moment.
and a little bit on the nose.
Yeah.
And also the fact that it doesn't eat Jon right there. I get it, Targaryen blood, but
it's the dragons who have sort of just been snarling and staring at people. It's now, basically giving the dragon the intelligence that, Jon, reading the situation where, oh yeah, Jon had to do this. I get it. And it's all over the stupid throne. So I'm upset.
Which is hilariously ridiculous that a dragon would be able to put all that together.
Well, it's just, why does the dragon have that logic, and why does it end in that conclusion that Jon's okay, but let's just melt the throne?
It's ridiculous because it's one of those moments where it's again, it just reeks of they're in the writer's room and they're trying to come up with cool moments to end the show. They're like, oh, what if the dragon just burns out the throne? And then just nobody was like, okay, that makes no sense at all.
I just feel like if the dragon finds Daenerys in his arms, and then he sort of runs and escapes being burned alive, and the dragon's just kind of burning things in the throne room, including the Iron Throne, it would have been much better. I think just they never really set up the dragons, intelligence levels. They've always kind of hinted at oh yeah, they kind of do their own thing. They kind of interact with humans, they're kind of their own bosses. But they never really set up this deep intellectual thought. And then here it is, a scene where it's all of a sudden, the dragon has to, make all these decisions in the moment, not to kill Jon, to melt the throne.
Because again, it's that cardinal rule that a lot of TV series that I see when they don't have a finale, when they don't have a good finale break, which is that, again, trying to introduce this new element in the last episode, or rather the last season, when they should be wrapping things up. I feel like that's another kind of problem that came from it, is that they're trying to introduce all these new elements where it's again, the whole kind of interest area that we've seen as far as being with the dragons throughout the entirety of their show was not them as these giant action-based killing machines, but the fact that we have grown with these dragons and gotten to know these dragons like characters through their bond with Daenerys, and kind of how those three and Daenerys are really all that's left of old Valyria and this dynasty that we're now seeing play out in real time in House of the Dragon. And so we kind of had that bond with them, and if anything, it made, once they turned to the giant killing machines that had been hinted at, kind of even more awesome. But now all of a sudden, to add this new element that is supposed to mean that, oh, these things have this ancient intelligence that gives them these cognitive abilities that had never previously been set up before, it kind of just is a little silly.
Yeah, I'm fine with them being intelligent. I just, it goes to the main point that we've been making about this season of, setting it up. The whole series, we've been kind of saying how, in certain seasons, Daenerys' storyline has lacked a lot of things. And it's well, maybe they should have just spent some time showing us the intelligence of the dragons,
Right.
and then here it is, this scene, it would have more weight than
Right.
it does. It kind of, like, again, it's cool. It gets rid of the whole, who's going to sit on the Iron Throne problem. It's no one, because we're starting from ground zero. So I like all that stuff. It's just, the fact that the dragon is not, this fire breathing, oh, I see John has killed her, I'm going to kill him. Like, that's what I kind of expect. I don't expect the dragon to be like, oh, I understand the politics of the situation and I
Right.
kind of agree with you. Like, I don't, that's what it kind of reads like
Right.
to me. I don't know if that's, the intent, or if anybody
I don't
else
think
reads
they're.
it.
The
But
unfortunate thing is, like I said, we can try and graft all this meaning onto this moment all the live long day, but at the end of the day, I just don't think that the creators really had any idea of what this was going to mean.
yeah,
Or
it's
anything,
just a
which is
moment
the saddest
in
part.
this show.
It's just a cool moment. But let's cut
And,
to really.
well, here's the thing: is like, after this scene, it cuts to, like you say,
Right.
or it's
the
cuts
moment
to this
where
council
really,
moment.
yeah, this council
But
meeting where things really start to go wrong, and it's like,
here's my problem with this cut. Right? Is, if you kill Daenerys, you have the Dothraki, you have the Unsullied,
right.
you have all her troops. It's not just gonna be like,
No.
oh damn, like,
Right.
let's just put
Shit.
John in
Let's just
prison.
put John and Tyrion in prison. Like, no, there's gonna be
I
another
feel
week.
like
That moment right there. The fact that we are like, this is what supposed to be like, what, a week later, 2 weeks later, however much time it's been since the Lords of Westeros. Like, these are still Dothraki and Unsullied. The fact that we don't find ourselves embroiled immediately in another war is the most unbelievable thing of this entire show. Like,
I think there should have been a half-hour sequence of, basically, John is like fighting off. He's like fighting with Grey Worm and whatnot, and then, or like he's fighting some Unsullied, like, obviously Daenerys is like Kingsguard or
right.
Queensguard, and he's doing well because he's a good fighter. But like, it's like, go tell Grey Worm what's happened, and then Grey Worm, basically understands what's happened. You have Sansa understanding what's happened. You have this sort of battle, and the Lords of Westeros are able to sort of, contain the Unsullied and
Right.
Dothraki.
I don't necessarily know about the Dothraki, because the Dothraki provide a problem in and of themselves, but definitely I feel like
Yeah, but there needs to be some sort of battle which leads to, I know this is cliche, but you have the unwinnable standoff, like John, like, basically Grey Worm's gonna kill John, but you have maybe what's his face, the Blackfish son.
Edmure.
Yeah, maybe, because like in the council meeting, the reason why I say this is Edmure kind of presents himself
Right.
as,
But
someone
which
of
in
status.
which in the council
So-
meeting comes off as like, oh hey, I'm still here, I'm still alive.
Yeah, so maybe if Edmure, was the one that
You
had
could
the
also
knife.
you could also get the Ironborn back in this as well. Finally, bring them involved. With Yara maybe having some scores
So-
where it's like, oh, first my brother dies fighting for you. Now Daenerys, now you killed Daenerys too. Like,
Yeah,
that would
well,
have
I think
created some interesting.
I
things
think
there.
Yara coming into the battle sequence would be weird, but I think, like, something like Edmure is there, the Knights of the Vale, and if Edmure is the one that sort of has the sword to Grey Worm's throat, and like everyone is sort of, at a stalemate, and maybe Sansa comes in and sort of, it brings it to a political situation, like, hey, take John as prisoner, take Tyrion as prisoner. We're going to conduct this council meeting. Grey Worm, you represent your armies. So like a ceasefire is called.
Right.
And, and then we cut into the council room. I just think that would be more realistic, like the jump cut, and the sense that what we got is that
It's the most obvious
Grey Worm
sign.
Grey Worm didn't do anything. He just
Right.
like,
It's the most
let's
obvious
just talk
sign
about
that
it.
it's like, yeah, we need to wrap this shit up and get this over with. And we already blew all of our budget on 2 gigantic battle sequence episodes. Like, we can't afford to have another battle sequence when they literally wrote themselves into what would have been another battle sequence, because there was in no universe does Jon killing Daenerys result in this quiet standoff where the Dothraki and Unsullied peacefully wait for the rest of the Lords of Westeros to come to the city. Like, they still controlled the city, There's what, a couple Northerners there still left, but it's like the Unsullied and the Dothraki still primarily control the city. So
Yeah, but you could have at the beginning of this episode, like, all the Knights of the they were there already, I guess. But Edmure could come in. Like, you could have um, characters arrive, to see the aftermath of King's Landing, and then that leads to them in the battle. I guess, yeah, budget, maybe that's the concern. Maybe they just weren't really concerned about, um, being sort of true to nature and what we would expect in a real life situation. I just don't think an army would want to talk about it when their leader gets murdered. I think they would probably be intended on securing the city and killing not only the person that perpetrated it, but basically their soldiers, which would be all the Westerosi people.
right.
So it definitely, there's a missed opportunity here with a battle sequence. I think, again, the missed opportunity with Bran sort of seeing and trying to parallel King Robert's ascension to the throne to Daenerys's ascension. I think that's a missed opportunity. And then, this council meeting, the only thing I'm going to say, I'm going to let you sort of take a lot of it, and maybe I'll pepper in some thoughts. But again, I just can't get over, they walk a prisoner up to the council meeting and say, "Hey, you figure this out."
Yeah, and that's
Like,
I feel like, again,
why?
like there's not too much more that I have to add to that, because that unfortunately is the end all be all. Like I said, we've already talked about all the problems that as far as what's missing in the lead up to this council meeting, right? But this council meeting, like, first of all, I mean, why is anybody listening to Tyrion at this point? Like, Tyrion, pretty much, if you think about it, almost all of Tyrion's decision making up to this point has been what's led them to there. Like, Tyrion is the one that has been supporting Daenerys, obviously, since Essos, right? Tyrion was dumb enough to think that again, all of Tyrion's battle plans at the beginning of last season completely failed. He was dumb enough to trust that his sister was going to actually want to, live long enough and not start a major battle sequence, that she was going to send the Lannister armies up there. He's the one who told Varys the information originally, which ended up helping to perpetuate this thing. He's the one who then immediately sold out Varys to Daenerys, which we also talked about last episode, which kind of came out of nowhere. And then he's shocked to see what happens when Daenerys is actually like why is forget like all the problems with the whole him being a prisoner. Why is anybody listening to Tyrion at this point? Like, any sense of validity that he has at this point as like a skilled strategist, a good battle commander, a good diplomat has been ruined at this point. Like, completely and all but ruined. They are literally standing on the rubble of on the foundation of his failure, so the fact that they're allowing him to be the one that makes the decision is still, to me, the most baffling. Forget all the other stuff. Again, it's completely relying off of our love of Tyrion as a character and the fact that Tyrion kind of evolved from his introduction on the show to be like the fan favorite character. But and this is kind of what I've been talking about, where, again, it's so hard for me because Tyrion still is and always will be my favorite character on the show. But it's what I talk about when I feel like Tyrion has been so heavily character portrayed is, again, the reason why we fell in love with Tyrion in the first place was because he was intelligent, was because he was able to make all these skilled, calculated moves, was because he was able to walk into a room where everybody was second guessing and disregarding him and plotted to have him killed, and he was always able to work his way out of those situations with nothing more than his cunning and intellect. There was a reason why when we saw back in season 5 that he was going to Daenerys after he murdered his father, there was some level of excitement there because they're like, wow, the smartest man in Westeros is now going to advise somebody who could be like, has been evolving up to this point to be this really, really big power player, So like there was always that level of excitement. And then as time went on, once he met up with Daenerys, like I said, season 6 really, really did a number on him. And it feels like everything that they've been doing has just been relying on our love of Tyrion in the past and Peter Dinklage's performances. And God bless Peter Dinklage, he still acts the hell out of every single scene that he's in. But it's like Tyrion at this point as a character has fallen pretty far as like characters who should be taken with any degree of legitimacy. So that, I feel like, is the number one problem as to why.
I just think there needs to be one fundamental change to this scene is that, he is a prisoner in front of this council, and so it does make sense that the lords would be questioning him and he would be responding. So I think it should have been more like they're grilling him and he's trying to like hey, this is the answer, but like you guys got to think about this. And then it's like, no, shut up. You're a
Yeah.
prisoner. And then
Which
I
I mean,
think,
Grey Worm does say, but then he just keeps talking.
yeah, but I think it should be from everybody in the
Yeah.
group. Like pretty much the Lords of Westeros are willing to listen to him. And
Right.
then Grey Worm's the only one that wants him to kind of
Which
quiet
is crazy because
down.
from the Lord of Westeros' standpoint, you're like, this guy helped bring her over. This guy is
Exactly.
largely the reason why she came over. Why are
so
we listening to him?
so I think, if Sansa's sitting there, right, and she says, Edmure, sit down, and then she's sort of listening, and Tyrion's saying things, and the rest of the lords, like Yara, are basically shouting him down. And, Sansa's sort of just like maybe calculating sort of the bits and pieces of what he's saying. And then it's her turn to sort of question him. And she leads him into these things that he sort of, ends up saying in the actual episode. And it's really Sansa who is, giving that channel for him to sort of use his political prowess to suggest things to this council. I think it just would have been a better scene. It would have been a little more complex. It would have gave Sansa this understanding that, her time as his husband and knowing who he is, like she knows how to sort of get the information out of him that they need, without at the same time making sure that, he's a prisoner. And you could have other lords sort of question her, but she has the status. Like the way that the scene plays out is he still has this great status and everyone's willing to listen to him. But the main thing is, I think, he has no status. And the fact is, Sansa, I think, has to use hers to really shield him and drag that information out of him. And, it's really, she's a cunning, queen, that's going to lead the North. So I think, this is one of those things where, just slight tweaks to the writing can make this scene really good. I think, overall, the whole idea that, they shouldn't really, it should be an elected monarchy and no longer a birthright monarchy. That's the change that they're essentially making
Right.
here. I think that's fine.
Again, not
I'm
bad
not
ideas that
opposed
right.
to that.
Not bad ideas that are being presented here. Just a lot of stuff that like it feels like there's something missing. Like again, I feel like for me, everybody always complained about the idea of Bran becoming king, and it's like I never really had a problem with that. My problem was always just with how the idea for it almost came out of nowhere when it should have very easily been built up to. We literally had an entire season of spending time with him, learning to become the three-eyed raven, learning from the mistakes of the past. And but like I said, my problem was always just with their treatment of Tyrion here. And the fact that it's like, okay, so Tyrion is literally just like, he can literally do or say no wrong. So then the fact that the Unsullied just leave Westeros with absolutely no problems at all. And they're just like, oh, we're going to go to North. The Unsullied, okay, but like the Dothraki, they're not going to say, they're just going to leave. It's like, last I checked, the Dothraki had to be convinced. It took years to convince the Dothraki, and so much. It literally took a dragon to convince the Dothraki to cross the Narrow Sea, and now they're just perfectly content with going home. The decision to have Jon rejoin the Night's Watch literally felt like a joke. That literally felt like a joke in the writers' room where they're like, "Oh man, what are we going to do with Jon? Would it be funny if besides the fact that it's already a joke enough that Tyrion is going to be that they literally reward Tyrion for his years of failure by making him hand of the king. It's like, oh wow, this dude literally just basically almost brought about the end of our entire, civilization, way of life. What are we gonna do? Oh, make him hand of the king. He totally did it so well the first time, which he did, which is the sad part. There's totally, we should totally have to do it again. And then, like the idea to have Jon rejoin the Night's Watch feels like a joke. It feels like a joke in the universe. It's almost treated like a joke in the universe. It felt like a joke out of universe where Benioff and Weiss are almost chuckling to themselves like, what if we just had Jon rejoin the Night's Watch? Literally to the point where that became the biggest meme I felt like that came from this episode is when Jon is leaning down and kneeling before Bran, Sansa, and Arya before he gets sent north to the wall. And everyone is just like, okay, they're gone. Grey Worm, the Unsullied, they're gone, which were the only reason why we even did that in the first one. Okay, Jon, you're good. You can stay. Like I feel like that in and of itself is like, what? Like,
so the thing that I find really strange is like, basically Jon going beyond the wall is him being banished from politics and, banished from the realm. So, that's sort of, again, they're just their way of getting, banishing you from the kingdom. so I guess I'm fine with that because it is like clearly he's going to find a home with Tormund and really he's going to be at home. Like it's not like it's not really a punishment for him. Um, it's just he won't be able to use his rank and title and all that type of stuff. And so it's not like a huge win for Grey Worm and the rest of the army. But it's for Westerosi lord, right? That is sort of the worst punishment you can have is to really be removed from the game, right? So John is no longer going to be part of that game. His children are not going to be part of that game. So like whatever, I can see where Grey Worm might be like, okay, I'm starting to understand the way this realm works. The Tyrion being named Hand of the King. Um, I can see, once Bran kind of gets elected to be king, yeah, okay, I could see him making a bizarre decree. It basically, hey, you're politically savvy and you're going to be enslaved to that position until you die.
Yeah.
Like it kind of makes sense. What I don't think makes sense is the small council meeting where it's
Yeah,
just
well, and let's
literally
talk about
all
that.
Westeros
How
lords.
this episode, basically how this episode ends, where they
Yeah.
essentially try to tack on this Lord of the Rings, Return of the King-esque ending, where it's just a brief clip of montages and sequences that kind of just wrap everything up, where we have the last moment in King's Landing, where they've somehow they've rebuilt the Red Keep that quickly to the point where they have the small council chair and they have everyone in. It's basically just like kind of a who's who of who's left standing, essentially, that wasn't already granted a position. They're like, okay, so not Gendry, because Gendry's now ruling the Stormlands, but so it's like, okay, who's left standing? It's like that isn't already banished or doing their own thing. Okay, Davos, okay, so he's master of ships. Brienne, okay, that makes sense for her to become Lord Commander. Podrick, okay, so he becomes a new member of the King's Guard. Sam, he's the new Grand Maester. Okay, all of that makes sense. And then they're like, oh, who else is left standing? Oh yeah, Bronn. We gotta give Bronn something to do. Oh yeah, he's gonna be the master of coin. And it's like
I'm not opposed to Braun being on the council because it's the one loose thread that would have not it would have made sense if he wasn't
right.
in that joke position. But
I don't know. Like I said, it's more so just like the schmaltz factor of it, and it feels like these last couple of sequences feel like a sequence is almost from a completely different show. Like that doesn't feel like anything from Game of Thrones. It feels more Tolkien than Martin.
But what the one thing that I would have loved to see is that Grey Worm is on that council, and
that would have been cool.
Also a Dothraki, like, and not necessarily like he just came from the stables and he's
right.
sitting down, like have a little bit of like time has passed, Grey Worm and this Dothraki member, whoever it may be, has been a little bit Westeros-ized, like he's part of the milieu, the ruling class, because that was part of the deal. Like here's all this lavish land that your armies can go settle and own. Well, they should have a representation in Bran's kingdom, and that's out the door. So basically, what happened? It's Daenerys has the city. There's no reason why Grey Worm or the Dothraki would give up the city. They elect Bran king, and then all of a sudden they just like, yeah, you know what?
Right.
We're fine with this.
Because
We
the
don't
other
want any
weird thing
representation.
too that's also established,
we don't want
like,
any
so
power.
We know the Tyrells are gone. That like their family's been wiped off the map. Their entire family is gone. The Martells, okay, there's just another random Martell that popped up out of nowhere when they did not make reference to the fact that Prince Doran had any other children or any other living relatives, but there's a new Prince of Dorne. So that leaves two vacant kingdoms, basically. The Vale of the Arryn, Robin Arryn's still there. Obviously that's another joke that's made, is that he pops up at the council and people don't even recognize him because it's been so long since we've seen him, but he's grown up so much. He's like 21, 22 on that council. So there's that. And it's like, so they're not going to do anything with that. Like, they're just going to leave. And then it ends. The final shot is this kind of montage ending of where essentially Sansa becomes queen in the North. Okay, that makes sense, as far as the North gaining its independence. Still not a fan of how, again, she kind of like became Cersei Lannister, essentially, of the North. But okay. John goes beyond the wall with the wildlings, and that's supposed to be his happy ending. And Arya essentially becomes Christopher Columbus, basically, where she's going to go west and basically discover America, almost. Even though Westeros is supposed to be based off America geographically, but it's like the whole thing that they've been saying since season 6, when they kind of realize, oh man, we have nothing to do. We're going to have Arya kill the Night King, and then we're going to have her discover America, where she's like, like, oh, with the what's west of Westeros, And so I felt, I was literally, it's funny because I was chuckling, and this is where it all comes full circle, because I was making nonstop jokes during the finale while I was watching it, where during the small council scene, I'm like, oh, that's a spinoff. Because this was at the time when they said, they're like, oh, we're working on developing 5 Game of Thrones spinoffs. I'm like, so the small council scene, I'm like, that's a spinoff. The Jon going north of the wall, I'm like, that's a spinoff. Sansa being crowned queen of the north, I'm like, that's a spinoff. The Unsullied going east, I'm like, that's a spinoff. Arya discovering America, I'm like, oh, that's a spinoff. I was literally listing off, I'm like, okay, because we know just how shameless this is. I'm like, this is not actually the finale of Game of Thrones. This is going to be just a backdoor pilot like they used to do for all these new spinoffs. Then obviously 1 year later, COVID happened, and that idea was promptly crushed. But needless to say, how it looks like my idea started to come a little bit full circle since the Jon Snow spinoff has officially been greenlit. So, like, I don't know.
Well, it's. I think the purpose of the ending was to leave things open ended and allow for different series based on the outcome. Because it's like, what does John do beyond the wall? What's the new threats? It's I don't know, I don't know if I have an interest in that show. You're gonna have to show me like a trailer that really hypes me, because
right.
What are we gonna see? Like, they're just building shacks in the snow. Like, like I don't really see, now that the Night King is gone. Basically the children of the forest were murdered when they were protecting the three-eyed raven, and Bran was escaping. So what is left beyond the wall,
right,
for us to see, that's going to add, some sort of stakes to that type of show? Because it's, at the end of the day, it's just a bunch of people trying to survive in the wilderness. Right. So it becomes what, like a Naked and Alive type of show, I just don't know, how they're going to make that interesting. If that show, does actually get to the point where we have a full season. So, and the same thing with I don't know if any of these things are enough to drive a full show. Arya trying to discover new lands. Like, I guess you could do a new city of the week. Arya explores, and she has some sort of ragtag band of sailors. Bring back Yara. Maybe Yara, she's the Ironborn queen, but like maybe she just gets bored of that and she's helping Arya seek out new territory. Who knows what these,
I definitely feel like of all the characters that got the rawest deal in that last season, I feel like Yara is the one that got the rawest deal, where she's in the first episode, she's like, oh, I'm going to go conquer, take back the Iron Islands from Euron because he's in King's Landing, so that Daenerys can have a place to fall back to if nothing else happens, and then is gone for the rest of the season, doesn't show up for the funeral in the North once Theon dies, nothing until this final episode. So I definitely feel like Yara, after having, I would say, a pretty damn good, awesome season last season, gets kind of like a raw deal this season, ultimately, as far as being a character that has a lot of promise, was meant to like take on a fairly substantial role in the books and the story going forward, and then kind of just like gets left at the wayside, at every which turn, So
yeah, I don't know. It's like, I don't know if I really want to dip back into the aftermath of Game of Thrones. If they do, like I say, go ahead with a series like that, I think you would want to see not only someone, like Jon Snow up north, but you would want to see where all the other characters are, and see how they interplay.
Which is why that if they were to actually do this, and when they do the Jon Snow spinoff, that it's not just going to be Jon. You're going to see the other characters. You're going to see Sansa. You're going to see Tormund. You're going to see Sam. You're going to. It's basically going to be like kind of your check-in with everyone. You're not going to just see Jon. Obviously,
they have really good writers and really good people in the business sort of behind the Game of Thrones verse. Yes. So, if they come up with something, they come up with a good trailer that tells you, hey, we got another compelling story to tell in this universe. Okay, I'll be willing to give it a try. But I can't say that I'm excited about anything Game of Thrones until really that first episode hits, and
Right. Agreed.
we're
And hey,
seeing it.
look, I will say this
Um,
at the time of recording, obviously, by the time this episode aired, House of the Dragon will have been all but wrapped up. But at the time of this recording, we're about to watch the third episode of House of the Dragon, which is set to premiere tomorrow night at the time of this recording. And I can safely say that, like, so far, they have been delivering on their promise of delivering, like, and turning Game of Thrones into more of a universe rather than a singular story, which is something that I was not against, but was very skeptical about how they were going to handle it, especially after the handling of those last couple seasons of Game of Thrones. And I could sufficiently say that, like, they've got me back into Westeros as far as that goes. Like, I'm fully back and engaged in Westeros again, which was their goal. So as far as like it being a case by case basis now, as far as whether I'm going to watch each show, obviously that's going to be only time will tell with that. But as far
yeah, I
as
think the the first season of House of the Dragon definitely shows that, you know
yeah, there is
my
still
point.
interest here,
It's like
but
they can, as long as they tell a compelling story, they can
yeah.
get you back into the world.
And look, like I said, I mean, we've been
I'm
talking
in a
throughout.
wait and see mode for
Right.
anything.
We've been talking throughout the majority
Westeros.
of the show about, like, Martin's thrones versus Benioff and Weiss's thrones. And I feel like, again, the people have spoken as far as demonstrating. They're like, yeah, we want Martin's thrones. Again, it's why the outcry for the Winds of Winter has been so strong still these last couple of years, as the years have gone on and on. It's why people, I feel like, are that much more invested in House of the Dragon than they would have been if Martin wasn't as involved. Martin is fully back and involved in the TV show realm in a way that he really wasn't the last couple of seasons of the show. And so that, I feel like, is kind of at the end of the day, what it comes down to is that Song of Ice and Fire, everything Thrones related, everything Westeros related, is Martin's vision. It always will be Martin's vision. And these last couple seasons are kind of what happens when he doesn't have as much active and direct involvement. Now, before we get out of here, before we wrap this thing up, I just wanted to call this segment, we talked about it in the last week's episode with the most ridiculously over-the-top character deaths, and I wanted to sort of continue that into this week's finale, which is there are two shots in this episode, which I like to call just the Benioff and Weiss feeling themselves corner, as far as just the most ridiculously extravagant, over-the-top shots that have no reason to be in there other than the fact that they just look cool as shit. And they both involve Drogon, ironically enough. The first one being when the camera pans up and you first see Daenerys walking out of the ruins of the castle after she's landed with Drogon on her back. And you just see Drogon's wings like take up the frame perfectly symmetrically behind her, so she literally looks like Maleficent with like dragon wings growing out of her back as she walks up before he takes off. And the second one is when Jon is walking up to the castle in that long tracking shot as we follow him up to when he's inevitably going to kill Daenerys. And then we see this massive mound of what looks like snow and rubble, and then Drogon just wakes up and you see all this stuff just like coming off of him. I think that this is like a couple years removed from The Hobbit, so I feel like they were trying to like mimic that shot of Smaug from the second Hobbit movie coming out from all the gold and all of all of this stuff coming off of him. Again, just two ridiculously excessive and needless shots, but they're just only there because they look cool.
I think yeah, I might agree with you that they might be
there's no reason for any of those shots. They're only there because they're like, oh man, this looks so cool.
They definitely, I like both the shots, and I wouldn't trade them for anything. But the fact is,
but like I'm just watching them, and I'm like, do these really need to be here? Like, come on, guys.
Yeah, I think the way that they've handled Daenerys in this episode is, she basically went full Cobra Commander. It's like there's the black and red and like
See, for me, she kind of almost looked like Dracula, like with the pale face and the leather cloak and the dragon wings behind. I'm like, what are we doing?
They definitely like what is it, like the First Order and the Star Wars Force Awakens. Like I feel like they kept her kind of the way she's always been throughout the entire series up until this episode.
Right.
And then in this episode, they sort of just like took these inspirations from like other intellectual property and they just totally just flipped the switch. Like she has her house banner, which is black and red. She's wearing, sort of an appropriate outfit for that. The dragon has a lot more of a presence than it has had around her. It's like protecting her. It's like we haven't seen that in a while. Like the shot of it coming out of the snow is sort of like it was resting and it was kind of just close enough to protect her.
Right. But then it still
You
lets
know,
John through. So that doesn't even, that doesn't even matter.
exactly. So
That's pointless.
it's one of those things where, and like the fact that the dragon wings being an extension of her, you know, all that stuff is cool and you know visually works, but yeah, it just all of a sudden out of
Right.
nowhere she's this new character, and you know not a bad character. I think it's cool that she's kind of this like has gone full blown, you know, invader of Westeros, and you know she's basically preparing for a never ending war, and you know it's kind of a cool version of Daenerys.
Yeah.
But too
Just
bad
wish we could have gotten it like a couple episodes ago.
yeah,
Like
it
imagine it was
appears
that
in
Daenerys fighting the Night King as opposed to, our Daenerys.
yeah, you know, it's just you know, imagine that this type of character we had some time to see it really set up and develop and you know, when they actually do the attack on King's Landing, you know, that's who she is. Like you know, has all the colors, you know, all the giving the fiery speeches that everybody should be, you know, basically executed, you know. Um, like it's too much too quick
Yeah.
is basically been our complaint the for the entire eighth season. And you know it's like I'm not opposed to things that happen, and I generally did enjoy probably the first 5 episodes of this season in this third watch through the series. And then this last episode, like I got it. You know, the story beats sort of, you know, they do relatively fall into place in terms of what the plan was for the series. It gets you to an ending. But, you know, it's one of those things like, you know, I watch Better Call Saul and we get to the ending of that and it's just blows my mind. We get to the end of Game of Thrones and it's just like, okay, the show's over.
Yep. That's it. Move on with your life.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
not even it's
exactly.
not even
So
like oh, what the hell happened? Where it's like, where did this come from? It's just okay, it's over. And that's it. Go on with
yeah,
your
so
life.
I'm,
Like,
you
it's like
know,
the Ferris Bueller post credit scene where it's like, you're still here. It's over. Go home. It's finished. It kind of feels like that. Last thing I
yeah.
want to say before we wrap up and get out of here. Favorite, like I said, we talked about our favorite characters, some of our favorite episodes in the last 2 episodes. So before we get out of here, I just wanted to ask you, Professor Pat, I'm not going to have us rank all the seasons because I'm not going to do that because we're running low on time, but what was your favorite season of the show? Favorite and least favorite season of the show?
I don't know. It's really hard to pick the favorite season because I think, you know, I think season 7 is a good runner up, you know,
I agree.
but I think we started seeing the flaws of the series, you know, trying to get to the end and
Yes.
rush through things. So because of that, I'm just going to go with season 4. I think it's
Yeah,
tried
I
and
agree.
true.
Season 4 for me is still the
So much
best
good stuff
season.
happens. The budget like suddenly jumps, but they still maintain, I think, a lot of the setup and a lot of the intricate writing that we like from, you know, season 2 and 3.
Yeah.
So it really caps off a fantastic moment of the show. In terms of the least favorite, you know, I think I'm going to have to say, other than Hard Home,
Season 5.
season 5
Yeah.
is a little bit of a drag. Cool things happen in it, but it's really where you most see, you know, some of the changes in approach to the writing take place. And you know it's not necessarily like any of the seasons are terrible, but
Right.
that's probably
Like the
going to be
worst
the
season of
least
Game of
favorable.
Thrones is still better than most other seasons of television, but for the most part, like I said, I could not agree with you more as far as like season 8. It's so awful because it's like I would always try and justify season 5 as being the worst season back in the day, and I'm like, but then there's Hard Home. But then I realized I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
but it really was just Hard Home. But like, there's a couple other episodes like the beginning of that. But yeah, season 5 for the most part is just a drag. It's a snooze.
Yeah,
I'm not a fan of it.
season one is a kind of a
I know
hard
you're not a fan
hard
of season
start.
1. Season 1 will always have a special place in my heart. But
No, it's a cool season. It gets everything started, but like, you know, I think the first couple episodes take a while to get the ball rolling. And if you're
right,
introducing this show to someone new that hasn't really, you know, watched it before or heard anything and it's kind of been like living under a rock, they're gonna have to really watch until Ned Stark gets it. before like the light
Right.
bulb goes off.
Which
And,
again, I feel like
they
that's also a
dive
thing of
right
where
in.
like you could say that was both season one's greatest strength and also greatest weakness is that it was so vehemently like dependent on the novel, and it like season one is the closest adapted from the novel to the point where it's like it built itself up to those final two episodes in such a strong way that made those two episodes feel so strong and really carried you over and made you excited for the rest of the show. But the process of actually getting there on the week-to-week basis almost a little bit was like detrimental because there was so much that it was setting up by virtue of what it needed to do. So I understand everyone's complaints and criticisms about season one, even if I am still a tremendous fan of it, and it would still be probably within my top 4 or 5 favorite seasons. But with that being said, people, we finished. That's it. It's over. That is Talkin' Thrones. That is our Game of Thrones recap series, start to finish. You guys can go back and listen to the entire Talkin' Thrones feed on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And if you want to see us in video format, every single episode that we release for the first 3 seasons is still available in its full form on our YouTube channel, Talkin' TV. And we also released clips for the first 5 episodes of season 4 before we went strictly audio for that as well. So make sure to go back and watch that. If you guys want to see our thoughts in visual format, be sure to follow Professor Pat at Instagram at Patrick W. Huber. Follow myself at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms. This has been an absolute blast. It's been a privilege and an honor to recap this with you, Pat. I just have to say thanks again for sticking it with me 1.5 years later, but we finally did it. We finally finished it. It's over.
I don't know. Like when you pitched this to me, I was like, oh man, maybe I should, give the show another chance. And I committed to it. And it was kind of eye opening. I never thought I would watch the series again, but here it is. I had to watch it each week to talk Thrones with you and our audience. And, I think I got a new insight and appreciation for the series. And I think going forward with specifically House of the Dragon, hey, maybe it increases my enjoyment a little bit. So hopefully, if you were listening through any of these episodes or want to go back through them, hopefully that increases your enjoyment as well.
100%. And like I said, people, the battle for the throne may be over, but we're always putting out new content. So even though we finished with Talkin' Thrones, make sure you guys continue to stay tuned into the rest of the Talkin' TV podcast because we still got a lot of awesome content coming your guys' way for the rest of the time. By the time this recording comes out, we'll have officially recorded and put out our podcast for Lord of the Rings, Cobra Kai, so many other things that are coming down the pipeline for the rest of 2022. So be sure to stay subscribed to the channel. Stay tuned to our audio feeds, to Twitch for all of that stuff. And as always, people, 12 seasons in a short film and watch more fucking movies. See you guys next time.